Hello. I've been asked to record a short video about my experiences dealing with systemic bias in my job, in my career as an academic and also a researcher in industry. The place I'm staying at the moment has building work going on, so I've retreated to a local park where I hope it's quiet enough and there's not too many people around. So I actually was thinking about it on the walk down, and there's actually kind of a lot of examples. They don't just really pertain to me, because it's a very big and complicated topic, and people don't always see it in themselves. And even for myself, I will go on regular training courses and actually have a mentor to kind of help me to identify any of my own biases, because people think that they're acting in a nice, kind way, but then they don't actually realize that their behaviors are exhibiting all kinds of inherent biases that once they're told about them, that they would rather not have, and they're trying to work it out of the system. So I think I was asked to kind of comment on this because I'm a gay academic, but I've seen things to do with racism in the workplace, sexism in the workplace, ageism in the workplace, attitudes against people from other countries, attitudes against people who don't live on the right side of the tracks, attitudes towards people who have wealth and who don't have wealth. So these biases are omnipresent, unfortunately, in the human nature. And what we have to do is kind of check our own biases, check our own privilege, as they would say. But also when you hear something, say something. I can't emphasize that enough. You might not feel empowered to say something at the time, which I understand, but take action somehow, somewhere, and get feedback. You might not be directed to the person, it might be somebody else, but you have to say things, because otherwise I think as a society and as people, we won't course correct away from this sort of toxic behavior that people let permeate their behavior, permeate who they are. My own, as a gay man, thinking back over my entire career, now this isn't just from my last employer or last set of people that I've worked with, this goes back through Scotland, across Scotland, not just one university, Ireland, in industry in Ireland and in academia in Ireland, in Australia, in several different places, multiple universities in the United States, in industry. So I'm not pointing a finger directly at any one individual. And some of these attitudes, of course, will have changed over the last 25, 30 years. But things I've heard said to my face, like, "That's so gay," on more than one occasion. And even after I course corrected the person, they were still saying it. During the gay marriage vote in Ireland, people left pamphlets on my desk about the traditional definition of marriage as a joke. I think this is one of the problems in the workplace, when people go beyond being friendly colleagues to thinking that you're friends and that you can then engage in banter in the workplace as if you were friends. When you're in work, you're in work. When you're workplace colleagues, you act as if you're workplace colleagues. It doesn't matter if you're friends as well. Probably better to try to avoid finding friends and being friends. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be friendly. And actually, even when I came here to my new job, one of the first things I attended was an induction session for the new tutors, where the mantra, which I really ascribe to, is, work towards being friendly. We all want to be friendly towards one another, but don't pursue friendships. Don't try to become friends with people, which is, of course, very hard not to do. Become friends afterwards, outside of work. After you're no longer in a position of conflict of interest, become friends. But when people act in a way that friends would, and say things to each other that friends can say and get away with and be hurtful, or family, very hurtful, if colleagues do that, that's where it becomes very, very dangerous, because then it permeates all the activities that we have in our day-to-day life. Other places, I remember telling people about my now husband, and people said, "Oh, that's very unusual." And what they meant was, "Why would you be married to a man?" I'm like, okay. Why would you want a man to be able to come into hospital if you were sick? Why wouldn't you want, one of your, relations, one of your female relations or your parents to come in? Why would you want a man to come there into hospital and look after you? Things like, why would you worry about your medical cover for your husband or for your partner? Surely they're another guy. They should be able to get their own cover. All these little, death by 1,000 cuts, and I've got pretty thick skin, but I always do course correct. I do kind of give feedback. I haven't always done it, of course. When I was younger, there was things I think that went by, and then later I realized that was bad. Even senior positions that I've applied for, I now realize that actually people were biased against partly my sexuality, partly my choice of where I was living and the kind of my way of pursuing my career, and it wasn't just to do with my capability to do the job. They were letting other things get in the way. So in terms of sexism, I have seen so much of that. That's just still so depressing. Like, I wouldn't say I see sexism every day, but as a cisgendered man, I would see it too regularly for it to be accidental. And in hiring committees where people would casually say, well, would we really want this early career researcher? She's female, she might get pregnant soon. And you're like, you can't say that, you can't think that. Like, why would you think that that's, how are we going to become a diverse school? How are we going to become a diverse department, a diverse workplace if you let that attitude kind of permeate your thinking? Because people who are can give birth and who want to give birth, that shouldn't be held against them in the hiring decision. Like, why would you think that that's a good idea? Oh, because you have an immediate need to teach something or fill a gap or get a project done or write some code, so we can't take the risk of hiring somebody who might give birth. You're like, okay, that's insane. It's the same thing for parents or people who have caring responsibilities. I've heard of that as well. Also, people who live in particular locations because of their constraints. Oh, they're not one of us because they don't live in the village. They live outside the village, or they live further away. They're not in this side of the city. Like, I remember living in one geographical part of a city, and then people would comment negatively on it. And I grew up. I'm going to start giving away where I'm working now, but people would kind of comment unfavorably towards people in that particular part of the city. Racism, I still see that, reasonably regularly. People comment we have too many people of this ethnicity in our workplace already, and will that person of this ethnicity fit in because there's no other people like that? And that was thankfully more common many years ago in different places. That is very rare that I hear that these days. Certainly people will just let their bias shine through, and you have to call them on it. And when you call them on it, you can call them on it in different ways. Like, there's a sort of small course correction. There's the feeding back to who you report to. I think it's important we all do that. Sometimes you have to go to HR. Now, in my time, I've actually had to go to HR a few times, not many times, but I've had to go to HR when I felt it was getting serious, because I thought it wasn't just me, that the person was being sexist towards others, were being homophobic towards me, were being ageist towards others. So I think what is that when you experience one bit of bias towards you, chances are the person is exhibiting other things to other people that you don't know about. So I was glad that I did report this person, and in the end, they got fired. For other cause, not because of this, but it was kind of building up a pattern of behavior. So that person ended up getting fired. And I've had to fire people myself over time, not always due to bias, but usually due to other behaviors. Sometimes it's just, workplace, malpractice or fraud or theft or just being inept. But I have seen people, and thankfully HR is getting better these days at supporting you in getting rid of people who just aren't willing to kind of take feedback and adjust. And we all have to give each other feedback. So I think if you find something happening, make small course corrections with the people. It's not making a difference, report it. Probably also report it anyway, just to kind of get into the habit of talking to your line managers about things that you're seeing. Because if I was to list out all the little tiny things I've had to deal with as a gay man as a student in academia, I could end up in tears. It would, as it all adds up, it's brutal in terms of not being able to have somebody stay with me because it's illegal, or being under threat of if anything happened to me medically, my husband wouldn't be able to come into the hospital to look after me. When you're a minority, you suffer cuts in 1,000 ways, and if you can, get over them, but you shouldn't have to. I shouldn't have had to deal with this kind of constant little humorous comments and illegal comments and unkind comments and mean-spirited things, and people making decisions against me because of something that I am, when it's not really getting in the way of my job. But I've learned from it myself, and now I'm in a position of responsibility. So when I see these things now, I'll hopefully people will be able to come to me, and I'll be able to kind of, training sessions and course correction and feedback. But I think it's the responsibility of everybody. There is, of course, this unfairness in the system, is that those who are getting exploited, those who are getting this against them, there's I forget the exact term, but it's a burden of work on people who are being kind of abused, and the burden falls on them. And as a gay man, I feel the burden still, and that's not fair. I shouldn't have to do this, but at the moment we don't live in a just and fair society. It's everyone's responsibility to do this, but at the moment I feel like I have to do it when others don't, because sometimes there are allies who say that they're allies, but they're not really, because they act in a way they say that they're allies because it looks nice and they're popular and they wear a rainbow flag of, social justice, but actually they let others get away with bad behavior and they apologize for them. And they're the worst, because they're like an ally, like a wolf in sheep's clothing. They say they're an ally, but they're not really, because they'll let others get away with behavior and they'll apologize for their behavior, and they'll let them hide in plain sight. And for evil to prosper, all that needs to happen is for good people to remain silent. And the allies who aren't really allies, they're a dangerous category of individual. But most of the time, I think, in the world we're living in, especially in academia, we're getting better. There's many allies who are there to help us, and embrace them. But when you see them acting in a way that's not fully helpful, give them feedback as well, and to each other. I'm not perfect. I'm expecting hopefully lots of course corrections from my colleagues, and then hopefully the new place I'm working in is a global university, University of New South Wales in Australia. As you can hear from the nature around me, that's a kookaburra. If I got that wrong, I apologize. I'm not an ornithologist. I also like the fact that it's a university that's working towards being a leader in Australia towards equity, diversity and inclusion. And that's in the strategy, the mandate of the university. Because when you bring everyone together, when you create diverse pools of students and staff and researchers and professional staff and academic staff, you get very powerful structures, very resilient structures, and very globally aware, very powerful organization. So through diversity comes great resilience and strength, and I look forward to taking advantage of that and making it better for others as well. It's part of my job to do that. So yeah, that's a little bit of a long kind of explanation, but hopefully this is useful to some of you, because if you're earlier in your career, you have different challenges. If you're late in your career, maybe you identify some of the biases in yourself, but whatever it is, I hope you can help make the world a better place. So bye-bye.